Dead Space 2 is a game that has haunted me for 15 years now. Well, more specifically, there's one achievement that has haunted me for all that time. After unlocking 49 of the 50 achievements available at release back in 2011, I then tried the infamous hardcore mode, only to die, rage quit, and never touch the game again. Until now, that is. So what is hardcore and why is it so difficult? Well, Dead Space 2's hardcore mode is actually a blend of its two hardest standard difficulties, but with the added twist of limiting the player to only 3 saves throughout the entire game, and sending you back to your last save should you die, or the very beginning if you haven't used the save yet. These days, permadeath modes are a lot more common in games and even more punishing, but at the time it definitely seemed like one of the craziest achievements to hit the Xbox. The story contains 15 chapters in total, and whilst the game isn't all that long if you know what you're doing, you can still quite easily find yourself losing a couple of hours of progress with any mistake. I think what makes it feel even worse is how intense the Dead Space universe is, or at least how intense I find it, because I'm really not good with horror games, which is 100% a big part of the reason it's taking me this long to build up the strength to try again. But I couldn't put it off for any longer. I've got some serious unfinished business with this one, so join me today on a journey that has been a decade and a half in the making. I knew that if I was going to finally attempt this, I absolutely wanted to make it as painless as possible for myself. So I thought, why not use my second profile to not only do some runs through the game to help get used to it again, but also demonstrate unlocking every achievement from scratch. Maybe someone out there will want to put themselves through it too and follow along. So starting from a completely clean slate, I went into my first playthrough on normal difficulty with the goal of getting back some Dead Space muscle memory and unlocking lots of achievements along the way. During the escape from the medical bay in Chapter 1, I unlocked my first 2 achievements for dismembering 25 limbs and then impaling a slasher to a surface using its arm. And then 10 minutes later or so, I got my first suit, and with it some more gamer score. So plot-wise, Dead Space 2 picks up 3 years after the first game, with Isaac waking up on the space station with no memory of the last few years. So it's clear, things aren't going all that well here. But don't worry, a nice woman called Dana offers to help if we can meet up, so the next few chapters are spent trying to reach her. On the way through the residential and mall areas, I did my best to ignore the distant screams of people being hacked to death and instead focused on the lovely stream of achievements that were coming my way. Unlocked Romper Stomper for stomping on 10 containers, Derailed for surviving the train sequence at the end of Chapter 2, and then Lightspeed for dismembering the statue on the concourse. After that, I was rewarded for getting through the first 0G area and unlocked First Aid for using Quick Heal 10 times. During Chapter 4, I picked up a couple of achievements related to new enemy types, firstly Clever Girls for surviving the encounter with the Stalkers, and then Lawnmower Man for killing 4 enemies with the same Ripper Blade, which I got whilst being swarmed by the pack. After that, I finally reached Dana, and no surprises here, but turns out she didn't really want to help, and instead is part of the Unitology cult that wants to capture Isaac and study his marker pickled brain. Luckily for us, a gunship appears and mows down everyone but Isaac, meaning we can escape. I do love some plot armor. Back to achievements, unlocked Torment Me No More for killing the mini-boss at the end of Chapter 5, and then Bouncing Betty for killing a Sith with its own mine. I ventured into the school where there's this iconic introduction to the Crawlers, and also the holdout section in the gym, and surviving that popped my next bit of gamer score. The game then throws its first fruit at you, and killing one of those without taking any damage was another achievement. Definitely don't worry if you missed that one though, there'll be plenty of other opportunities. And whilst navigating the mainframe lockout in Chapter 7, I found the Peng treasure, and then picked up a couple of story-related achievements for defeating the AI and completing the solar array puzzle. And speaking of story, before getting shredded by the gunship, Dana revealed that there's another marker on the space station, so the mission is now to reach the government sector and destroy the source of the outbreak, all with the help of 2 survivors, Ellie and another former patient, Stross. Unlock the electrician and engineer achievements for collecting 10 semiconductors and schematics, and then fully upgraded my first weapon for a nice 30 gamer score. At the end of Chapter 9, I set off a chain reaction to destroy the tripod's nest and clear the tram's path. It's not long before another obstacle appears, leading to probably the best part of the entire game, the return to the Ishimura. There were no achievements to be found during this section, but plenty of amazing environments that will be familiar to anyone who played the first title, with the added twist of most areas now being covered in materials from the cleanup operation, or those where the UV light is revealing the immense mess the initial necromorph outbreak caused. Eventually I made my way to the bridge and was able to activate the gravity tethers, leave via an escape pod, and continue on the mission to the government sector. But now a man down after Stross's marker dementia turns him completely insane and he skewers Ellie's eye out, and then has to be dealt with after trying to do the same to Isaac. On the plus side, unlock the advanced suit and with it the looking good achievement. Then whilst on the drill ride, I collected my 100th log and the librarian achievement before we finally reached the government sector. I sent Ellie off to be rescued, and then killed my 50th necromorph whilst it was frozen with stasis. I probably should have been making much more use of that, unlocked it earlier, but this is only normal, so no need for any sort of strategies really. I was quickly closing in on the end of the game now, and unlocked my next achievement by fully upgrading my rig and stasis. Then it was time to take on another infamous part of the game, the eye poke machine. Now plot-wise, the purpose of this is to stimulate the part of the brain that contains the marker's information, and Isaac, who has been seeing hallucinations of his dead girlfriend Nicole, is led to believe that this will help destroy the marker and with it, the necromorph outbreak. But in fact, it's all a ruse and actually makes him more susceptible to the marker's influence. But luckily I survived that, picking up the Cross Your Heart achievement, and then I had to hurry as you spend the last 2 chapters being chased by the regenerating Ubermorph. Luckily, these are pretty short and absolutely fly by, and I quickly made it to the marker and the final boss. The vision of Nicole pulls you into your own mind, and here you have to defeat her and rid all traces of the marker's influence, destroying it in the process and popping the final sacrifice achievement. Then I just had to navigate one final flight section to reach Ellie, who has come back to rescue in the gunship, and I was done with my first playthrough and rewarded with 2 more achievements, putting me at 31 out of the 50 available in the base game. And this meant I had now unlocked New Game Plus as well as the hardcore mode, but I wasn't quite ready for that one just yet. My next plan was to play New Game Plus, upping the difficulty to Zealot as this has an achievement tied to it, and also go through all the miscellaneous achievements I missed the first time round, most of which involve killing necromorphs with certain weapons or in specific ways. Zealot is the hardest difficulty in terms of the standard metrics, enemy durability, damage taken, scarcity of drops, etc. But obviously playing on New Game Plus negates a fair amount of those struggles. Either way, I wanted to carry over all my progress, especially the weapons, and not have to wait until certain chapters to unlock them and go for the missing achievements, so this was definitely the way to go. And as a side note, I was also using this run to make a bit more of a mental note of areas that I thought were going to be particularly troublesome on hardcore, and throw out some different strategies. But back to the achievements, I picked up the first of this playthrough nearly immediately after starting when I killed my 30th necromorph with Kinesis, and once at the first door, I was able to start working on the different weapons. I knocked down an enemy with the contact beam's alt fire before killing it with the primary, and I'm not sure how that works exactly with an infector, but I'm not complaining. And after that, I took out 6 enemies at once with the line gun's alt fire. I found the first pack encounter at the start of chapter 3, a good place to get this, just placing the mine at my feet and letting everything dogpile me. A worthy sacrifice. Just round the corner from that area, there's a decompression window, and smashing that out by impaling an enemy onto it rewarded me with the Skewered in Space achievement. Early on in chapter 7, you need to take an elevator ride whilst coming under attack from a fair amount of tripods. There's an achievement available for knocking them all off, and as far as I'm aware at least, the detonator is by far the best weapon to go with here. Any hit will knock them off, so you don't need to worry about aiming for the weak points of their arms, and can instead take a much easier shot at their bodies, and the detonator doesn't even need to be upgraded at all for it to work. I then killed my 30th crawler without triggering it to explode, and once back in the mainframe room, unlocked its trap by killing 20 enemies with deployed detonator mines. And my next achievement was a complete fluke, as I accidentally sent one of the pack flying across the room and impaled onto a far wall, and I'm not sure why it needs to be a minimum of 17 meters for this one, that seems oddly specific. After that, I whipped out the flamethrower and toasted 50 enemies, before getting the peekaboo achievement by killing a stalker with the Seeker rifle in zoom mode. And whilst I was back on the Ishimura, I unlocked shock therapy by impaling an enemy with the javelin gun and shocking 3 others with its alt fire, and again in chapter 10, I also managed to sever all 3 tentacles of a lurker with 1 line gunshot. The force gun doesn't have anything specific tied to it, but I still had to grab it for the sampler platter, requiring a kill with every weapon in the game. And there was one final achievement to be had in this level, as I cut off my 2,500th limb, popping epic dismemberment. I was starting to come towards the end of my second playthrough now, and picked up another 50 gamer score for simultaneously having 4 completely upgraded weapons, before killing my 25th crawling enemy with a stomp. And from there, it was a straight push through the government sector and the last 3 chapters. I destroyed Nicole in the marker again, and unlocked Mission Impossible for completing the game on the Zealot setting. There was one achievement that I'd missed though, so I started New Game Plus and stuck it on normal again so I could quickly rush through. My final bit of mopping up required me to decompress 20 necromorphs out the windows, and there's actually a limited amount of spots you can do this in, and I don't think it's possible to do it all in a single playthrough. It's definitely doable in 2. I was just silly and didn't think about it until it was too late. It took me just under 1 hour as I racked up the missing kills I needed from firstly the window in chapter 3 and then chapter 4, bringing up the vacuum cleaner achievement, the 49th of 50 available in the Dead Space 2 base game, and putting me at 950 at the original 1000 gamer score on both of my Xbox profiles. I was sitting at about 12 hours played total now, and unfortunately couldn't put off hardcore for any longer. So as a reminder, or for anyone that doesn't know, hardcore is a mix of the two hardest difficulties, with the enemy durability of survivalist and the ammo and loot scarcity of zealot, with the added twist of only 3 saves for the entire game, sending you back to your last save if you die, and if you haven't saved, that's the beginning of the game, so not a particularly pleasant experience. I'd singled out a few sections that I felt might be particularly dangerous and troublesome. Some I was confident I found a good strategy for, like using the line gun and contact beam to destroy the final boss, and some that I was less confident about, like the drill ride and the fight in the government sector lobby. So I did a lot of research for ways to approach these in the rest of the game, looking at guides and also speedruns for different ideas. There's actually a substantial amount of the game that you can just straight up skip if you just put your head down and run for it. And then there were the areas that I knew would be terrifying no matter how prepared I was. Mainly the potential insta-kill mechanics from the flying sections in the laser room. And finally, I knew if I was going to actually do this, I had to make it as stress-free and painless as possible. So rather than the somewhat daunting task of going from the start to finish on hardcore, I decided to run a fresh Zealot playthrough alongside that I could practice on. So play on Zealot using the exact weapon loadout that I planned, practicing each enemy encounter, and then once I'd reached the point I'd be saving on hardcore, I'd swap over and try and make it to that save. Then back to Zealot, move on to the next segment, and do the same. You get the idea. So I was definitely leaving no stone unturned in my efforts to get this achievement. Although as a disclaimer, I won't be using any of the DLC items, and I won't be abusing any power node duplication glitches or other bugs. Also, I might throw in some clips from the practice run as I go, but the majority of this will be from the actual hardcore playthrough. And now it's time to begin and get into my journey to the first save point. The first noteworthy moment came at the end of chapter 1 when facing the tripod. My aim definitely wasn't helped by the nerves I had from finally attempting this after years of thinking about it. There are stasis recharge stations dotted around, so just make the most of those, and on the subject, it's a lot easier to stasis the floor beneath enemies rather than attempting to aim for their bodies. I even took a few hits but never came too close to dying, and it's really noticeable the overall difference in damage taken compared to Zealot. But even so, I upgraded my rig HP at the very first bench for a bit of extra security. Speaking of upgrades, I'd made a note of my plans for when to buy weapons and have them upgraded by, and I was selling a fair amount of the items I collected to fund more power nodes. This nearly came back to bite me when I ran out of plasma cutter ammo whilst hanging from the train and had to finish off the section with the line gun in a panic, but in a weird way it almost gave me confidence that things don't have to go perfectly and you can still be fine. For the opening few chapters, the plasma cutter was my weapon of choice, but the line gun's ult fire also came in extremely useful on multiple occasions. I was spending my nose on both of these, but particularly the plasma cutter, as having 3 damage upgrades for that means you can deal with the tripod in the church as well as the tormentor with fewer shots. And I also made sure to pick up the schematic for the Ripper during chapter 4. This weapon is an absolute monster and will be staying with me for the rest of the game now. So I'd managed to successfully navigate chapters 1 to 5 in a single sitting, but unfortunately at this point had to go out. Thankfully the Xbox's quick resume feature meant I could turn it off and jump back into the game in its current state when I got home. And I also could have just made my first save and not had to think about it, but I really wanted to get past chapter 6 before doing it. Chapter 6 is a noticeable jump in difficulty and length compared to the previous, but not so difficult that I felt it was totally necessary to save before. In hindsight, that might have been the smart thing to do, as when I returned that evening full of nerves, I did nearly everything wrong. I accidentally popped one of the pregnants, particularly triggering due to the fact that's exactly how I failed my previous hardcore attempt all those years ago, although I'm much better prepared to deal with that now. I then completely botched the Stalker room and burned through a load of medkits, nearly died to the crawlers in the nursery, probably not helped by the fact I actually did die there during the practice run, and also tried to be smart and take down the enhanced puker with its own projectile, but I stumbled my way through the rest of the school and to the chapter's finale, the transport hub. Here I put myself on the verge of a heart attack as I'd forgotten to upgrade the line gun's ult damage enough to one-shot the brute. Either that or I didn't place the timeline quite close enough, or both. So when I realised it was still alive, I went into full-blown panic mode, attempting to spam it down with the plasma cutter before finishing it off with the line gun and a heart rate of over 200 beats per minute. I'll put in a clip of another run and show you what was meant to happen. I somehow survived that fiasco, and to some immense relief, made my first save. With a playtime of 2 hours and 8 minutes, chapters 1 through 6 were now behind me for good. So after that, I practiced the second segment of my Zealot save, and then it was time to jump back into hardcore. And upgrading the line gun wasn't the only thing I'd forgotten to do, as somehow I never purchased the security suit, which definitely comes in handy for not only survivability but also holding more items. So I picked that up and then took advantage of the newly unlocked respec feature to get all of my nodes back from the plasma cutter, and then put these into the Ripper's damage and also the next HP upgrade for the rig. Amongst the chaos of chapter 6, I picked up the detonator, which had its uses already, but what I really wanted it for was the tripod elevator ride. It just makes this encounter so easy. Double check if you have enough ammo to get through it though. I then retired the plasma cutter for good and brought in the force gun. The schematic for this is found just after the elevator, so I made sure I'd saved enough money to buy it at the very next store. It's really effective for dealing with the crawlers, the swarm, and also doing cool things like this. Chapter 7 is home to this potentially traumatic window trap, and also the first nerve-wracking flying section that can instantly kill you. Other than some sweaty palms, I made it through those unscathed. And the position of the things you're dodging is always the same, so just watch some videos and remember the pattern if you're that spooked. And I know I said I wouldn't be abusing any glitches or bugs, and this might break that rule, but during the holdout section that comes just after the flying, you can actually avoid having to fight any of the strong necromorphs by just running in a circle around the room whilst waiting for Ellie to unlock the door. As long as none of the pack or the lone slasher are killed, nothing else will spawn in, and I have no shame in taking advantage of that little oversight. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that there are sections of the game where you can just run through and avoid any enemy encounters, or those like in Chapter 6 where you can just kill a few of the necromorphs and trigger a door to open and skip the rest. But Chapter 8 has one of the former, but I definitely didn't feel 100% confident doing it, and I also wanted to collect some more items, so instead funneled everything through this doorway and straight into my Ripper. And quick upgrade update, I was working on my Ripper damage, line gun alt fire, and stasis duration plus cost. The next part that gave me quite a lot of trouble in my practice run, and therefore filled me with a healthy dose of dread, was the Stalker Warehouse in Chapter 9. And on the topic of speedrun tactics, I saw in other videos that it's possible to run through this area by making use of the stasis canisters, avoiding all but a couple of the necromorphs in here. But one attempt was all it took for me to realise that there is absolutely no way I'm going to be trying that during a hardcore run. So instead, I took my time and let detonator mines do most of the work, slowly clearing out all the stalkers, a couple of exploders, and the guardian with the help of an explosive canister. And canisters are definitely the theme of this chapter, because there's also the tripod nest to destroy. You can make your life slightly easier by taking a couple of them down with you before starting the mini boss fight. I just used stasis and the line gun's mines to deal with the tripods, whilst I launched the canisters at the tank and made it out unscathed. Now there was just one chapter between me and my second save point, but it was a rather scary one. I was back on the Ishimura for Chapter 10, and there were genuinely 3 or 4 sections here that I thought had a decent chance of killing me. The first of these was the decontamination chamber. I had a fair amount of trouble with it on my initial Zealot playthrough, but this time I was armed with a better strategy, as well as the newly acquired contact beam that made light work of the enhanced necromorphs. Then there was the area with the faulty electricity, and this wasn't too bad at all in the end. I was just scared of all the fast moving leapers that blend in against the dark walls. The real fear of the run ending came in the cryo room, where you're trapped in a relatively small area with 2 deceptively quick exploders and a couple of slashers. I seriously considered saving before this just in case, but ultimately I hoped I'd learn what not to do from my practice attempts and just went for it. Again, this was another encounter that I was extremely relieved to get past. The final hurdle before my next save was getting across the bridge. In my earlier runs, I sat back and picked up everything that spawns in here, but since then I've discovered you can just use the force gun to speedrun your way through before the majority spawn in. And it seemed a bit daunting, but it was actually very easy, even with briefly getting stuck on a puker. And once the gravity tethers were activated, I took the escape pod out of there and I'd reached the promised land of my second save. And this segment was only 4 chapters compared to the 6 that I did for the first, but it took me nearly just as long. Thankfully, some pretty tough parts of the game are now behind me for good, and whilst the difficulty was just going to continue going up and up, the remaining segments would be getting shorter at least. The next target was to reach the end of Chapter 13 and use my final save just before the eye poke machine. But standing between myself and that point were some seriously nerve-wracking parts of the game. I did the usual run through on Zealot to practice strategies and prepare myself for exactly what was coming up, but there were some points that I knew would feel like a bit of a coin flip no matter how prepared I was. But like I was just saying, the pressure was eased a bit by the fact I wouldn't be risking losing that much time if I was to die in this segment. And equipment and upgrade wise, I picked up the advanced suit whilst in the mines of Chapter 11 and started putting my power nodes into the contact beam. At this point, I pretty much had all the other upgrades that I needed, and the contact beam's crowd controlling alt fire is made even stronger once you get the spec upgrade for it, and I'll definitely want that for later. This chapter is also home to another elevator ride, but significantly scarier than the tripod one. There are about 20 slashes that drop in whilst you're travelling up, but fortunately there is a pattern to it. Other than one wave of 3, they will appear in pairs, and this spot here is always the first to turn up. So simply stasis him, go to town on the others, and then finish off the stasis Necromorph. And just repeat that another 9 or so times and hope you've got enough ammo to get through it. This led me to the dreaded drill section, but now I was more prepared. I'd checked out a speedrun and learned some new tactics, and the first of these was when getting the drill up and running. Once you replace the power unit and solve the hack, you can just do a loop around it and actually avoid having to fight any of the Necromorphs that usually come for you whilst you're waiting for the platform to lower, as they will get stuck on the other side. Then once on top, I spent most of the time precariously standing near to the drill itself, as it gives you the best shot of whatever climbs up the sides. Just absolutely do not touch it. During my first playthroughs, I had a lot of trouble with the massive amount of lurkers attacking from the walls of the cave, and I felt like I was getting hit by nearly every projectile, but after doing some research, I found out that for some reason, if you just stand still, then most of them will miss you. I still got hit by the occasional attack, but it was way more manageable. And before long, we'd crashed through the walls of the government sector, and I was into chapter 13, the last one before I could save again. This level alone has 3 sections that had me fearing for my life. The battle in the lobby ended up being the least concerning of the 3, now that I knew to just stand up the stairs, forcing everything to funnel directly in front. There's then another 2 rooms that you can completely skip by just running through. The latter is filled with stalkers, but much easier to pull off than that in chapter 9. And after that, you reach the laser room, which is so ridiculously simple, yet absolutely terrifying when the pressure is on. It's possible to run all the way to the other side in a single go. I'm not built that way. And with those behind me, I was so close to the save point. But unfortunately, I first had to navigate these red rooms of doom. And this 3-tiered thermal area can be tackled in 2 ways really. You can either fight off the hordes of Necromorphs on the walkways in the red rooms, or you can make a run for it and force them into the corridors that join each level. To be honest, I'd attempted both ways in my previous playthroughs and neither had gone well. Something was telling me that the running strategy was the best, but I wasn't all that confident. Throw in the fact there's a save point right outside, and I was seriously considering just using my last save slightly early. But then a part of me also knew how great it would feel if I could get past it, use the save, and never have to think about it again. So I just went for it. I managed to get into the first corridor unscathed, and other than some very last second use of stasis, swiftly dispatched all the Necromorphs that came after me. I then took some deep breaths and went straight into the second part of the gauntlet, and here is where I felt my heart enter my mouth. As I ran past this vent here, my worst fears were realised as an exploder spawned out of it, and every part of my brain was telling me that I was about to die. But luckily, I fired up a stasis, delaying the detonation, and got into the next doorway. And that's another example of why throwing stasis at the floor and not the target is a good thing right there. And that was it. The third area is just a brute which, despite being enhanced, still gets one shot by the line gun's alt fire, and I knew I'd made it to safety now. Like lots of the game, when it goes off smoothly, you probably look at it and think it's no big deal, but honestly, that can go so easily very, very wrong. I made my third and final save, with the segment taking me just over 1 hour. Comfortably the shortest so far, but definitely the most intense. And from here, it was a straight run and gun to the end of the game. Well, other than first having to survive the eye poke machine, which is really not that hard if you just pay attention to the distance number that's displayed along with your heart rate. Anything that has the potential to instantly kill you is definitely worth respecting, so that's why I used my save just before it. I made it out of that unscathed, signalling the start of chapter 14 and the arrival of the unkillable Ubermorph. And this is the highest pressure hack that you'll have to deal with in the entire game, but the fact I just used my save meant I wasn't risking losing any progress really, so there's no need to panic. And to be honest, that's the theme of this entire last segment. Whilst I obviously didn't want to die, I was so close to the finishing line that any death between now and the end of the game wouldn't set me back much time at all. So once through the hack doorway, you're free of the Ubermorph for a moment, until needing to grab a corpse to open another locked door. Again, I laid a nice trap before picking up the body and triggering a spawn, which gives me enough time to get out of there whilst he regenerates. And during this final gauntlet, there's one more 0G section to navigate, which features a very annoying nest that throws homing explosives at you whilst you're carefully trying to avoid getting incinerated. There are various quick ways to take these out, and I went with one shot of the trusty line gun's alt fire. And after that, it really is just run and gun to the marker. I mostly try to only kill anything blocking my path, and otherwise just freeze them in stasis and ignore. There were 1 or 2 slightly hairy moments where I got surrounded and started taking a few too many hits, but with the advanced suit and all the upgrades, you should have some decent survivability by this point. Although I definitely still recommend trying to avoid these types of situations. And looking back at the footage, it also appears that I've completely forgotten about the contact beam's alt fire, which comes in very handy for exactly this, so try and make use of that if you have it. It probably would have saved me a fair few med packs. And speaking of med packs, at the final store I made sure I was nicely stocked up on health and ammo. And at this point it had only been about 15 minutes since I started the segment, but I'd now reached the marker and the final boss fight. As I mentioned earlier, in my initial runs I was just defaulting to using the Ripper to try thin out the crowd, but that never went particularly smoothly. But luckily, I stumbled across a good strategy when practicing on Zealot of using the line gun's ult fire, probably to the surprise of absolutely no one by this point, to one-shot Nicole and despawn the pack in the process, and then swapping to the contact beam to deal with the marker. I think if you've got enough capacity and reload speed upgrades in it, you can comfortably just use the contact beam for both, but for whatever reason, I didn't do that. Either way, I sailed through and was now within touching distance of the end of the game. The only obstacle in my way was the flying section up to Ellie and the gunship, which can be potentially devastating if you splat against a rock and send yourself back a long time. But with my last save not even 20 minutes back, I wasn't so worried. Although I was still slightly nervous, as after getting this far without any mishaps, I wanted to finish off the run deathless. During my practice, I did attempt to just fly all the way right and see if that avoided everything, but as you can see, it wasn't very successful. Looking back at all my footage, it does look like the pattern's exactly the same every time, so again, just make a mental note of that before if you want to be extra safe. There's just one large rock on each side to dodge, and then a couple of gaps to line up with, and that is it. I'd made it to the end of the game, and to be honest with you, was in slight shock that I'd completed Dead Space 2's hardcore mode after all these years of putting it off. I'd also managed it deathless, which probably wasn't too surprising given how much practice and effort I'd put in, but still a nice achievement. And speaking of achievements, I unlocked hard to the core and brought up the final 50 gamer score for the original 1000. But there was something else on my mind. I didn't want to leave my second profile sitting at 950 out of 1000, and I had to make sure it wasn't a fluke. So I did it again. And whilst I managed to make it through deathless once more, I did actually have an unfortunate moment where my Xbox crashed, resulting in me having to redo the drill ride, the fight in the government sector lobby, and wasting about 45 minutes of my life. This probably would have caused me a lot more stress if it was in my first attempt, but I shrugged it off and went straight back in. Other than that, it was smooth sailing, and I managed to complete the second hardcore playthrough in 5 hours and 8 minutes, 17 or so minutes quicker than the 5:25 my first run took me, and brought up the 1000 gamer score on both of my profiles. But despite having now played through the entire game 5 times in the last month or so, I wasn't done with Dead Space 2 just yet. I had the small matter of the Severed DLC to get through for the true 100%, and this would also give me a good opportunity to show off a very well known part of this game, but something that I haven't mentioned at all up to this point. Achievement aside, the main reward for completing hardcore mode is the hand cannon. Taking the shape of a comically large red foam finger, this weapon has unlimited ammo, fires as fast as you can pull the trigger, and one hit kills near enough every enemy in the game. So what better time to give it a test ride than the 2 additional chapters introduced in the Severed DLC. This add-on has you playing as Gabe Weller, a security officer on the Sprawl, and the story runs parallel to Isaac's experiences in the main game as you fight through several familiar environments looking for your wife after the necromorph outbreak is unleashed in the mines. Achievement-wise, there are only 8 to unlock, with most of those coming by completing it on the Zealot difficulty, then a few miscellaneous bits to keep an eye out for. The first of these was King of the Hill, which I unlocked defending the quarry platform whilst waiting for a door to unlock. Next, I finished up Chapter 1 and picked up the Betrayal achievement after Gabe comes under attack from a superior officer and finds out his wife is a key subject and therefore on the list to be terminated. The Severed includes most of the enemy types you'll be used to facing, but also brings back the Twitchers from the first game. Although, these extremely fast-moving enemies, along with everything else really, are made significantly less intimidating thanks to the hand cannon. And if I'm being honest, it does just make it feel like you're playing a totally different game. I'm sure the plot and gameplay are excellent, but by this point, all I could do was think about reaching the end and finishing up my Dead Space 2 adventures. Continuing on though, Chapter 2 takes place in the hospital, and hidden away behind the familiar shower area is the Peng treasure, and with it, some more gamer score. After that, I continued through the medical centre, but could only watch as Gabe's wife Lexine is taken away by 2 men, claiming to have orders to capture her for further study. I chased them to the shuttle bay, where they are killed and transformed by infectors. But before I could escape with Lexine and live happily ever after, the same officer who tried to take you out in the gunship earlier reappears, this time armed with a live grenade. And here's where the name of the DLC comes into it, as Gabe's leg is blown off, fatally wounding him, but not before he's able to blow the fuses on the airlock and allow his wife and unborn child to escape. And during this final last stand sequence, there's also an achievement available for killing 16 or more enemies. And then once the credits had rolled, up popped achievements for completing chapter 2 and completing Severed on the Zealot setting. But there were still 2 left for me to mop up. Luckily, I've been creating new save files regularly in case I missed anything, and up first was a secret achievement for taking out the gunship within 30 seconds. This is easy enough, just make use of the canisters sitting on the platform and don't just wait for the one on the wall to respawn. And lastly, one of the very first areas you encounter is the grinder room, and pushing an enemy into the grinders unlocked my 58th and final achievement in the whole of Dead Space 2. The 100% completion was mine, and 18-year-old me would be very proud right now. So there you have it. That is how I went about unlocking every Dead Space 2 achievement a mere 15 years after it came out. This was a fun one, albeit rather stressful at times, but it's such a great game. Let me know what you think about it, or if you've done the same, and maybe this will inspire others out there to finally finish it off themselves. As for me though, that's 2/3 of the trilogy ticked off now, so I need to get back to Dead Space 3 soon. But that's me done for today, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.